Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. My name is Anya Quiros, and I am the CAZCA Engagement Coordinator. Thank you so much for joining us for the last speaker series of the year. Before we go ahead and get started, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. You guys are all muted, but please be sure that if you have any questions, you can use the chat. One thing that I will mention about the chat function is just to make sure that when you are using the chat, you select panelists and attendees so that the question, if you want to, if you want the question to go to everybody or if you want the question just to go to us, I just want to make sure you guys knew about that. Before I go any further, I want to introduce our awesome speaker today. This is Willie Sommers. He's the Invasive Plant Program Coordinator for the Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management. So today he's going to actually talk to us about the unique relationship between invasive plants and wildfire, and just kind of go into a little bit of depth about that and really how those two kind of have a little bit of a symbiotic relationship at times. And then also he's going to talk to us about the really cool grant program that the DFFM, or the Department of Forestry and Fire Management, has, and some of the really cool projects that are underway already thanks to that grant program. So before I'll go any further, I'll let Willie take the lead here. And again, if you guys have any questions, I'll be manning the chat. So you guys just go ahead and put any questions you have throughout the presentation in there. And yeah, go ahead, take it away, Willie.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And thank you everyone for taking some time this afternoon to allow me to talk about the invasive plant program at DFFM and about invasive plants and about wildfire. They're certainly intermingled and intertwined in the Sonoran Desert in particular. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and let's see, go into my PowerPoint and great. Can you see that now, Anya?
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, great. Yeah, just a little background about me. I'm an Arizona native. I went to 2 of the 3 universities here in Arizona, ASU and U of A. And at U of A, for my master's, I studied invasive plant management over in New Mexico, Southwest New Mexico. So certainly have the background for the job, and I'm really happy to be in this role now with DFFM. Next month, it'll be a year that I've been the Invasive Plant Program Coordinator. So certainly that first year of any new job or position, you're kind of finding your way and learning a lot and seeing a lot. And that's definitely what I've done. So yeah, let's go ahead and start the conversation. And if you have questions, certainly put them in the chat box. And Anya can interrupt me if there's a good question, a burning question that someone has. That's no problem. We can stop and chat about things. I've got about 34 slides, so I got about half an hour presentation, but I think you'll find it enlightening and useful. So a bit of an overview. I want to give a really quick agency overview for DFFM for those that may not be familiar with this state agency. Talk a bit about the Invasive Plant Grant Program, which we have now with some new state money. And then go over the concept of weeds as a biological wildfire. This is an important framework that we can use to talk about these invasive plants and how to manage them. Give a little bit of information about wildfire prevention through fuels reduction. This certainly applies to non-native invasive plants, just like it would in a forest situation. Some information about what to do post-fire, and then a little bit of concerns and opportunities, kind of looking forward into the future a bit. So one thing about DFFM, we're a statewide agency, and we certainly look at things from a high level. And my program looks at things too from a high level. That's just sort of the situation we find ourselves in. But the map on the left, our agency is broken up. We have 5 districts in Arizona, and each district has a district manager. And those district managers deal with forestry and fire programs within their boundaries. and other programs that we have. So we're forestry and we're fire management. So a little bit about our forestry programs, and I'm in the forestry side of the equation. We have a urban and community forestry program, looking at trees and urban settings and the values that they have for people. We have a forest stewardship and forest legacy program. Stewardship is basically working with private landowners that have forested parcels of land that would like a management plan or some assistance on how to improve their property. Forest and woodland health program. So we do have a forest health specialist for the state, and she knows a lot about insects and diseases that impact our forests and woodlands, and works with others to help mitigate some of those diseases and insects. And then the invasive plants program, which I coordinate for the agency. And then lastly, a wood utilization and marketing program. So a lot of forestry work, there's a lot of material, woody material that comes off of landscapes, and looking for markets for those wood products that might be innovative and new is something that our agency is tasked with. And then you get into the fire side of things, and we provide wildland fire suppression for 22 million acres in Arizona. It's essentially all state trust land and private land that's not incorporated into like a fire district or a fire department. So unincorporated land, that's where we come in and we can suppress wildland fires with our partners as well. We do have a structural fire prevention and mitigation program. So the state fire marshal, that office is housed within our agency, and they do like school inspections for structural fire safety. And then lastly, we have a wildland fire prevention and mitigation program. Certainly we work with communities and partners on how to protect homes and communities and infrastructure from fire. So that's just a real high level overview of who we are and what we do. We don't own any land, I should mention that. We're not a land owner, but we certainly manage natural resources and manage fire on state trust land and other areas where there's wildfires. So want to spend a little bit of time talking about the Invasive Plant Grant Program. Just as a little bit of background, we've had this invasive plant grant available now, gosh, since at least 2009. And at that time, and up until recently, we had a funding source, the U.S. Forest Service, and we would fund a couple of projects a year for invasive plant projects, fairly small projects. Like for me, at least, it's $10,000, $20,000 projects. But last year, we had the addition of some state funds. So last year, based on ARS 371309, there's a new statute titled the Nonnative Vegetation Species Eradication Fund. So that was established by the Arizona legislature to provide dollars to DFFM to provide grants. And we have a long history of providing, we call them pass-through grants, federal or state money that's passed through DFFM and goes to an organization or an agency to do some work on the ground. So last year, to kick off the program, there was $2 million available for invasive plant projects in Arizona. This was a huge boost to our program. We're really appreciative of this boost in funding from the state. 11 projects were funded and selected and have begun. And I'll show you the next slide a little bit about those projects. And we had 25 applications, so almost half were funded. For this current grant cycle and beyond, there will be $1 million available each year through at least 2029 of state money. So we've got 10 years of funding to utilize and help our partners get some work done. And then I just wanted to show a quick picture of, giant reed. That's a non-native invasive plant. This is along the Santa Cruz River in Marana. Something that we're looking at controlling, especially when it's small like that. That's a good opportunity. Just a little bit about the statute. It's called the Non-Native Vegetation Species Eradication Fund. There's certainly a difference between eradication of an invasive plant versus control. Eradication is basically getting rid of all of them. And that certainly can be done in places where you have a limited or small population. Oftentimes, though, we're dealing with control where we have established populations and there's a need to get a handle on them. And then I wanted to include this paragraph directly from the statute. And what it says is that we're going to provide grants, for projects that will assist in preventing fire and flooding, conserving water, replacing non-native species with native species, and restoring habitat to wildlife. So in statute, that is what our task is at DFFM with these state money. So it's a fairly broad mission or broad scope in terms of what species we target and where, but these are some criteria that we can use to allocate dollars towards invasive plant projects. And what's really great about this fund, to me, is that the replacement with native species. So in a sense, these are restoration grants. I'm not hesitant to call them as such. We're restoring a piece of land that's been impacted by invasives. So on the left there, we've got some projects underway, and I just wanted to give you like a high level look at what we're doing, or what our partners are doing. We've got 5 projects that primarily are looking at removing salt cedar from riverways and stream channels. We have 2 projects that are specifically looking at removing buffalo grass. I know one is in Tucson directly. And then 1 project targeting Johnson grass, which is a pretty big problem in southern Arizona, especially along drainage ways and other low-lying areas where water collects. Some of the other target species that these grant funds are removing are diffuse snapweed up in northern Arizona around Flagstaff, giant reed, we saw a picture of that earlier. Oleander, we had a situation where there's oleander mixed in with salt cedar, and so that got away from some kind of urban development, and so they're removing oleander as well. It shouldn't be in this riparian area. Stinknet, we'll talk more about that, and yellow blue stem, which is a new invader down in the grasslands of Sonoyta and Elgin. And this is just a map showing we did a pretty good job, I would say, in spreading out the dollars across the state of Arizona. And we had 2 projects in the Tucson area. Just a little bit about the grant criteria, especially this year. So we had the funds available, just under $1 million, 30,000 went to DFFM for some indirect costs. The theme this year was riparian areas. Match, we had a minimum match of 10%. Project duration, so recognizing that these are restoration grants, it's going to take some time to control these invasive plants. We allowed up to 3 years. Last year it was up to 2 years, but I wanted to make that change and allow more time for this important work to get done. We had a grant request range of $10,000 all the way up to $300,000. And eligible costs are, of course, invasive plant removal and treatment, revegetation with native plants, the maintenance, which is really important, having to go back and, you might not get all the plants that first time. And then monitoring as well. You need to monitor the areas and make sure that reinvasion does not occur. And this was in the earlier slide, but just wanted to reiterate that eligible applicants are local government, state agencies, NGOs, tribes, and universities. I think we do have one project on tribal land in Yuma, so for one of last year's grants. So this is how the grants shook out for 2020 with that riparian theme. And these are in an order of grant award amount. But the National Forest Foundation, they're doing a project on the lower Salt River near Granite Reef Dam. Highly visible, highly used area of the Salt River. They're targeting the species you see there. That's $200,000 award. That's on the Tonto National Forest. And then Friends of the Verde River, they're targeting riparian invasives similar to the Salt River project. And that's an area where a lot of invasive plant management work has been done. Fire is not as much of a concern there, but certainly that's a high quality stream, high quality river system. And then Graham County, this was a project that was more on a hazardous fuels angle. We wanted to provide them some funds. So they're doing some work in the upper Gila River along the Safford area. And then Arizona Game and Fish Department, they're going to do a salt cedar project on the lower Gila River in Buckeye on one of their state wildlife areas on some land that the Arizona Game and Fish Department owns. So those three projects are primarily riparian river system salt cedar. And then closer to home for some of us in Phoenix, the Maricopa County Parks and Recreation Department is funded for a project. This is actually in the Spur Cross Ranch Conservation Area and looking at removing salt cedar on the Cave Creek system, and then a lot of other desert invaders, which we'll talk more about. Friends of Saguaro National Park, they were funded for a project. This is in the East District, the Rincon District of the park, removing fountain grass from some tributaries of Tanque Verde Creek. And this was a really neat project because what they want to do is remove fountain grass and improve habitat for some aquatic toads and other wildlife that use some of these pools in these drainages of Tanque Verde Creek. So there's not only will they remove invasive plants, but they're going to reincorporate some aquatic wildlife after the removal. And then lastly, Sky Island Alliance, they're going to be working in Aravaipa Creek, removing vinca, which is a non-native ground cover vine that's become pretty established in that important riparian area of central Arizona. So that's just a look at where some of the state money is going. It's going to partners to do on-the-ground invasive plant removal, maintenance, monitoring, and revegetation, which is great. And we had a lot of good proposals. We had 32 proposals this year, so there's a lot of need out there. We left left some good projects on the table, which hopefully they can continue to look for other funding opportunities to address their concerns. And then lastly, just wanted to show you a little bit of where we're going as far as trying to prioritize the grant dollars. We're certainly going to take all applications, but next year looking at emerging threats, stinknet and yellow blue stem vinca come to mind. And then the subsequent years, targeting some funding towards forest and woodlands, some of those invasive plants, aquatic habitat. There's aquatic noxious weeds that impact boating and agriculture. And then grasslands as well. There's some non-natives that are impacting our grassland ecosystems, especially in southern Arizona, that we can target some dollars towards. So that's just a glimpse at the direction of our grant program going forward, and prioritizing some dollars in these different buckets of priorities going forward. So now we're going to change topics a bit. And when I did my master's thesis work at the U of A, I remember reading this paper, and I had to dig it back out because I think it's relevant and important. So Stephen Dewey, back in '95, wrote this paper for extension at Utah State University. And basically how these invasive noxious weeds that we're concerned about, they're a biological wildfire. They're out of control and spreading rapidly. And so let's talk a little bit about that. You know, wildfires and weeds, they share a lot in common. Impacts, spread, and management. Like wildfire, you know, at least not a severe wildfire, there's temporary impacts, and recovery, the land can recover. But with weeds, we're often looking at these long-term permanent impacts, and they remain on site and multiply. They stay there and just continue to unfold and impact the landscape unless something is done. So that's the impact, short-term, long-term, and then the spread too. Like you think about a weed seed, it's like an ember from a wildfire, and it lands somewhere and germinates and starts a new infestation. So that's another similarity is the spread. And I wanted to have this is just a very simple, you know, drive home the point, the parallels here. But if you're going to effectively manage wildfire or weeds, you're kind of doing the same thing. You're looking in the same direction. There's an element of prevention. There's an element of detection. And there's some kind of element of suppression or control. And then lastly, you have to do some kind of rehabilitation of the site, which is often in the world of weeds, revegetation. So pretty simple stuff. This is a good framework, I think, that we can just start to have a conversation about invasive plants and as we go forward. So prevention. This is the first line of defense for fires. It certainly is for invasive plants too. You know, when we can start looking at some lands that are not presently infested and prevent them from becoming infested, maybe we should think about that. I'm sure some of you do, but can that programmatically be, you know, an angle that we take? And then you can't talk about prevention without education. And so I wanted to highlight, you know, the Desert Defenders program in the Phoenix area. They're doing just that, educating residents and about invasive plants. In Tucson, they have a long, ongoing Save Our Saguaros Beat Back Bufflegrass Month in Tucson. It's in February. And there's usually the mayor of Tucson will sign a proclamation declaring it Beat Back Bufflegrass Month. You know, they're really on it in that area about bufflegrass, and they have been for many years. And then there's also infographics and other means of improving public awareness. So, you know, Arizona State Parks put out this infographic here, which I like. You know, all the different ways that you can start fires and making sure you don't do that. So, you know, target shooting, make sparks. You can shoot a rock and you've got a spark and a fire. So this is on their website if you're interested in getting that. And then another tool in the prevention toolbox is regulation. So in Arizona, we do have a state listed noxious weeds, and there's some associated restrictions per the Arizona Department of Agriculture. And this noxious weed list, in case you're not aware, was updated in late 2019, maybe even January 2020, to kind of mirror New Mexico's regulations and noxious weeds. So there's a Class A, a Class B, and a Class C noxious weed, and they have different meanings, and there's a list of those species. So certainly bringing in a noxious weed, bringing in noxious weed seed is prohibited per some of the regulations that are under the Department of Ag here in Arizona. Something that DFFM does in terms of prevention, which you may or may not be aware of, is we have fire restrictions. So the Arizona State Land Department manages Arizona state land. However, we have some statutory authority when it comes to fire restrictions on state trust land. So as of a week ago, and this is on our website, there's still fire restrictions on state lands across Arizona. So the map there, so the stage 1 restrictions include Coconino County, south of the Grand Canyon, and Yavapai County. So that yellow-orange area is a stage 1. That's the lower level restrictions. And then stage 2 is all the red. So a lot of desert territory, including the Phoenix metro area and Gila County. That's under stage 2. So stage 2 are higher level restrictions, and they prohibit fire even in developed campgrounds or improved sites. So no charcoal fires or anything of that nature. And that is for state land that is, available for outdoor recreation. So this is a tool that we use throughout the summer, typically around Memorial Day. Some fire restrictions will go in place if we're really facing some hot, dry weather and some windy conditions. We'll put these in, we'll post them to our website and try to make folks aware of these restrictions if you're camping or recreating on state land in Arizona. So a little bit about detection. So there's prevention and then there's detection. You've got an invasive plant. Early detection is key, right? You want to find those plants as soon as you can and know that you've got them there. Part of that is proper identification. That's especially true for plants like thistles, and that's why I included this New Mexico Thistle Identification Guide from the New Mexico Native Plant Society of New Mexico. They've got some examples in there, where this thistle is a native wildflower and this one's a non-native noxious weed. Boy, they look really similar. So you need to be careful about that, making sure you properly identify an invasive plant. Part of that detection is timely reporting and mapping. So getting it written down, getting the location, putting it on a map. And also when you're out there, if you detect an invasive plant, can it be removed right then and there? I mean, you've got an opportunity if you have permission from the landowner, you've got the right tools with you. You can, do you need to put it in a bag and carry it with you? But, again, if you detect something, can you remove it right then and there? And then lastly, and this is kind of a big topic, I won't go into it, but there is something called EDRR, Early Detection Rapid Response. And that is employed across the country, across the United States, when you have invasive plant problems or detections, that you can get in there and quickly do something about it. I see a couple of questions. Is there anything we want to take on now, or should I keep going away?
I think we're good, Willie. I think some of these questions are a little bit education based, and I think we can have a little bit more of a discussion towards the end about them. They're good questions.
Great. Good. Okay, so we'll move into suppression, and this is a fire-centric look at the process. But so shifting gears, we're thinking about a wildfire. So wildfire has been detected. Rapid response. So this is what they call initial attack in the fire world. So that's a fire truck going out there and sizing up the situation, which is step 2. So getting eyes on the fire and seeing what is the best plan of attack. And then the next step is containment. So you want to stop further spread if you can and know which direction the fire is headed. And you can put out spot fires outside of a defined containment zone. That's the way you combat a wildfire. You draw a line around it in the sand, if you will. And then mop up, that's the fire term for just really staying on site and extinguishing every live ember in that containment zone. So you might hang out there for a couple days and get those hot spots taken care of. In the world of weeds, this really means eradication of every plant or seed. That could take a couple days, obviously, on a fire, but years on a noxious weed infestation to try to get every plant taken care of. So just a little bit of imagery to help us with this, rapid response. So this is a fire in Glendale where there was a little airplane here, little fixed wing that dropped some retardant on a brush fire in the Sonoran Desert. That's a rapid response, getting out there and trying to extinguish that very quickly. Containment on the right, this is the Constellation fire, which occurred in August in the Wickenburg area. And that red line is was active fire line at the time. But that dashed line below to the south and to the east was a containment line that was put in to hold that fire back. So the fire could burn to that containment line and would hopefully be held in place. These are concepts that we can and should be thinking about when it comes to invasive plant management. But it's a challenge because this is a map of inventory mapping points of some of the desert invaders around the Phoenix metro area. And, we've got a lot of different invasive plants, from east to west. And it's pretty daunting when you, think about the challenges that we face with some of these invaders that have really, been here for years. And so how do you contain something like this? We'll come back to that, but this is a really great slide that I found from the Wisconsin DNR about the suppression of weeds. And so you see the purple line, their direction of control efforts. So you really should start on the perimeter where you got these small isolated infestations and tackle those. And because that's the lowest level of time and effort and money, and start to work your way into that, what they call the orange line, the advancing front. You're starting to work there and you're working your way till the core. You don't want to just start in the middle where it's, just horrible with invasive plants. You want to get a handle on it like you would a fire. I think that's really the point here of some of these slides, is just to drive that point home. If you have a property that you have control over, maybe you can start on those outlier populations and work your way in for control. So a lot of you, if you are a land manager or practice invasive plant management, this is going to be pretty basic information, but I thought it was important to put it in here. And I've got some asides that I can provide, but really when you're
Hey, Willie.
Yeah.
So Sierra, and I can also kind of answer this question, which is why I wanted to just interrupt real quick. Where did the data points from the invasive species GIS map come from that you just showed? And so I could actually answer that question. So this map is actually the public map of the Desert Defenders invasive species map. So this is a map that we are working with in collaboration with McDowell Sonoran Conservancy, the Whitetail Mountains Conservancy, Maricopa County Parks, and a few other partners, like the Arizona Sustainability Alliance, for example. So all of us are working together using a very similar app collector right now to map a number of invasive species. Right now, we're focusing on 8 or 9 priority species. And so these different colored dots that you see here represent those different species. And you can see that in the legend. And so that's the points that we have collected thus far. Well, when Willie took this screenshot, that our volunteers or our defenders had gathered. So they get trained and they go ahead and, head out into their parks or even their neighborhoods and go ahead and start mapping for us. So all those dots represents data points gathered by our volunteers. But I just want to go ahead and answer that before we got too much further. But thank you so much, Sarah, for your question.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And my apologies for not putting the source. I've got everybody else on there for a source, and I goofed on that one. But yeah, that's publicly available at the screen grab. Biological control. So there's some different categories of control that we can employ on the landscape. And so biological control is the use of a control organism, usually from the native range of the target species. So for instance, in Arizona, the tamarisk, misspelling there, leaf beetle, has been released in northern Arizona, in southern Utah, and is a pest or a predator of salt cedar. So that's an example of a biological control. And then grazing animals can also be considered a biological control. So you could have, sheep or goats graze invasive plants to suppress them as well. And as an aside, I was also reading about, got some information about what's called a bioherbicide, which is a soil applied bacteria. They're looking at, some researchers are looking at to try to control some annual invasive grasses. So that's kind of a combination of biological control and chemical control, which is using an herbicide. And typically the terminology is a foliar spray when you're going to apply directly to the plant. And also there's a cut stump treatment for woody plants. So like with salt cedar, you might cut the plant to, ankle high size and then apply an herbicide to the cut stump. And of course, with herbicides, follow the label, wear PPE, follow the label, safety first. That's huge when you're treating invasive plants. Manual control, digging, hand pulling. This is great for small populations or areas where chemicals or motorized equipment can't be used. So, our own yards and volunteers too, right? That's a good activity for volunteers is using hand tools in specific areas. And then mechanical control, using tools or machinery, typically with larger infestations. So mowing would be a mechanical treatment, as would excavation or with a backhoe on like giant reed. And salt cedar, there are cases where you really need to get in there and just dig out the roots and start from ground zero. All these methods are great, but you've got to use them in combination, in tandem. So integrated weed management, also called integrated pest management, but yeah, using a combination of control methods specific to the target species and the site, and including, putting in native plants. That's what's recognized now as the approach. You can't just do one of these things and walk away and pat yourself on the back and call it good. Because as a last point there, it's going to take at least 3 to 5 years of integrated weed management and that maintenance retreatment to reduce an established non-native invasive plant infestation. So, our grants are for 3 years. And boy, it's going to be likely that, these projects that we're funding, they're going to need to continue to do some maintenance in year 4 and year 5 and onward. It's an ongoing battle. So, and then lastly, so you've done your suppression, like this photo here is over in Yuma, and they use some machinery to remove non-native invasive plants, and the site is quite disturbed. Now it's time to go in and rebuild that plant community along this channel here. So probably you've heard of active versus passive revegetation. So is there a viable seed bank of native plants or native plants nearby? If there are, or if there is, maybe you could just be passive and let those native plants colonize a site and reestablish. But if not, you're going to have to be active and put in native plants. These are pretty general things, but you can do reseeding or use container stock. Also, the use of tall pot plants can improve establishment. And hold on just a minute. I'm going to close my window. There's some landscapers working outside with some chainsaws. Hold on. Okay, sorry about that. If you're not familiar with tall pot plants, that's pretty cool. You can grow a tree or a shrub, especially riparian trees in a tall pot, a yard, 3 feet tall. It'll have a deep taproot, and then you can auger down a hole and put that, pipe with the plant in there and pull up the pipe, and you've got a 3-foot root that will have contact with some good soil moisture, maybe even some water in a shallow riparian area, and you've got much more likelihood of success. So tall pot plants are really cool for riparian areas. Irrigation, do you have sufficient water available? Some things you can do to help if you have limited water is really mulch around those plants, or use swales, plant them in depressions so that the water capture is going to be maintained. You're going to enhance that soil moisture. And then timing too, fall is probably the best time right now. Right now is probably the best time to plant, container stock and tall pots on a revegetation project. You're giving them the longest establishment time before the summer comes. They've got the most time to get happy and get comfortable there. So I've learned that the hard way, planting trees in my backyard. Just a little bit more about revegetation. Because I've seen a lot of projects around the state. I've picked up some things that folks are doing, but herbivory protection. So you need to fence plants that are palatable to wildlife. And if you're reseeding, you need to think about ants. Elise Gornish is a restoration extension ecologist with the University of Arizona, and she's been doing some work, her and her students, on ant herbivory, and ants really can rack up a lot of your seeds on a restoration site. So in desert settings, it's something that I never thought about. It's overlooked, but she's been doing some good work on that. And then there's a term here, secondary weed control. So you've gone in and you've cleared an area like here at Chanamarana, El Rio Preserve, and you're going to have some weeds come back. It's often overlooked, but when you clear an area, what's the plan for secondary weed control? Like on that example in Yuma, you've got a lot of bare ground. Are you ready for the onslaught of weeds that are going to come? Excuse me, just a couple other considerations, climate change. So this usually involves getting plants from lower elevations. Like if you're working here in Phoenix, you might go to Yuma to get some of your cottonwoods because they're under hotter and drier conditions than Phoenix typically. So, and they might be more resilient to a changing climate. And then genetic variability, you might select more drought tolerant individuals for enhanced resilience. That's a little bit beyond my pay grade, the genetic stuff, but certainly there are some studies and looking at stock that is shown in settings that it can handle hotter, drier conditions. So that's a little bit of the parallels between fire and weeds. Let's talk a little bit about fuels reduction. We have a wildfire prevention component to our agency, and this is critical these days. What we look at doing and what a lot of individuals and agencies across the state look at doing is protecting critical infrastructure from fire. So bridges, power lines, those kinds of things. And then we talk about values at risk, and that's communities, homes, utility corridors, protecting water supplies and wildlife habitat. So identifying areas on the landscape that we really cannot afford to have burn, and we really want to protect life and property. And so we need to keep those areas safe. Those are our priorities. So defensible space, it reduces fire danger when wildfire comes, because in a lot of areas, fire is going to happen. You just need to be prepared for it. And we do have a FireWise fire prevention staff. And if you're familiar with this, there's a zone 1 right around your house where it's 30 feet. It's going to be lean, clean, and green. So just really, almost void of vegetation, or if there is vegetation, you want healthy green vegetation. And then that zone 2 is going to be 100 feet from your house in all directions of reduced fuel. So you want, spacing between your trees, not a lot of brush, not a lot of weeds, anything of that nature. And what we do on a big scale in Arizona is put fuel breaks around sensitive areas in Arizona, around communities and other assets that we want to protect on the landscape. I wanted to tell you a little bit about another grant that we have, because I'm not the only game in town. We do have a hazardous fuels reduction grant, and we get funding provided from the state, the Forest Service, and the BLM for hazardous fuels removal adjacent to Forest Service land, adjacent to BLM land, and adjacent to state trust land or on state trust land. And so these project proposals are kind of similar to my grant, to 20,000 to 200,000. And the purpose is to mitigate fire risk in wildland urban interface, or WUI, areas for the protection of our communities. In Arizona, I wanted to tell you guys this too. Last year, we assessed 525 communities in Arizona and looked at their risk to wildfire. And the way it shakes out is 13% of those are low risk, 44% are medium, and 42% are high. So those high risk communities, we want to prioritize grant funding and some of our efforts there to protect everybody. The same with the medium risk too. As it mentions, this helps us prioritize areas to do our assessments and our projects. I looked this morning, and in Maricopa County, the top communities at risk are Sunflower, Desert Hills / Joy Ranch, that's up in Carefree, Anthem, Cave Creek, and New River. And I had no idea that Sunflower was in Maricopa County. If you guys have driven up to Payson, Sunflower is like 20, 30 miles from Fountain Hills, but I guess it's just barely at the extreme north end of Maricopa County. And that's, by a lot of open space. So this is a new tool that I've come across, wildfirerisk.org, through the Forest Service. And I just wanted to show you, this is a risk map for Cave Creek. And it says here, populated areas in Cave Creek have on average greater risk than 56% of communities in Arizona. So you can see there's an orange area there of higher risk, and then to the northeast of Cave Creek as well. Certainly, we've had three fires that impacted this area over the summer, and with the conditions that we have now, the risk is, higher than these maps indicate. But just wanted to show you that, this is one online tool that you can look at different parts of Arizona and assess risk. Globe over in Gila County, quite a different story. You can see the forests that surround Globe in the Pinal Mountains are very high risk for fire. Actually, Six Shooter Canyon, for instance, is one of the higher risk areas in Arizona. I think it's like one of the top 5 risk areas. So risk has to do with the vegetation type, and then the mountainous terrain as well really plays a part. But just to look at 2 areas in Arizona of risk. So a little bit about these desert invaders, and stinknet is a big one. That's a flyer there from Tucson, the Tucson area on stinknet. These are some of the biggest offenders in our Sonoran Desert home. Stinknet, salt cedar, which we've talked a lot about, Malta star thistle. I did my master's thesis on yellow star thistle, which isn't as common in Arizona as Malta. Buffalo grass, fountain grass, red brome, which is really a problem, especially on the Sonoran Desert portion of the Tonto National Forest. Sahara mustard, and then we can't forget about Mediterranean grass, Schismus barbatus. That's one that impacts really low elevation, flat, low desert that's pretty sparse, but we've had fires in that area due to Mediterranean grass. So what do these things do? They form dense monocultures. They just take over, and they're prolific. So on the left is yours truly in a stand of stinknet on the lower Salt River back in April. And that was flowering actively. And then on the right is what it looked like on Friday on the lower Salt River. So there's some native plants that have been have passively revegetated. They've also actively planted some riparian species, but they're really competing with, they were really competing with stinknet, and this is quite a fuel load there. Quite a distinct color that stinknet makes across the landscape. I mean, you can identify it driving 75 miles an hour on the freeway. So the concerns with like red brome and some of these other winter annuals is that they change the fire regime. They leave behind layers of thatch that can carry fire. We just saw that with stinknet, that thick layer of dead material. And what should be worrying a lot of us that care about the desert is some areas are going to start to see this fire grass cycle, this feedback loop. The image on the right is from Hawaii, but you have grass invasion, a lot of fuel, fire, losses of cactus and native plants, and you go right back to, then you've got a bunch of grass again, and you're stuck in this, you can be stuck in this vicious cycle of fire and grass. There are areas, fire-driven conversions of desert scrub areas that turn into invasive annual grasslands. And so there's just, the grass just monopolizes the resources and takes advantage of the conditions. Cheatgrass, which is related to red brome in the Intermountain West, Utah and other states, has just taken over millions of acres of sagebrush steppe vegetation, and they're unfortunately in that grass fire cycle, which can just, the shrubs might not be able to handle. And I also wanted to mention, this is a really important consideration that what we need to be on the lookout for is 2 consecutive wet winters. That creates conditions for a very active fire season. And we had that in Maricopa County, 2019 and 2020. We had above average wet winters. That first wet winter, you have a bunch of annuals. They have a bumper crop. They set seed of a bumper crop. And then next year, the conditions are right for that bumper crop to, express itself. So this is a real challenge for us in some desert areas. What to do post-fire? The California Native Plant Society did put out a fire recovery guide just last year. You can go on their website and get it. It's pretty comprehensive. What they talk about is after a fire, you need to do 2 things. You need to do an erosion evaluation to look at erosion potential. And then you also need to look at recovery of vegetation. So, how much was consumed and how severe was the fire? The nice thing about this guide is they have a post-fire checklist for land care for landowners, which I think will be helpful. And I gleaned some information from that for when I got a call from a landowner that was asking about what to do. And I love what they say here at the end. They say, be patient. Lands have recovered many times after wildfires. Once human-made debris is removed, the land will heal on its own in most cases. It just needs time. Now, that's certainly for fire-adapted portions of California. And, our Sonoran Desert is not fire-adapted. So that's great advice, although, not necessarily for our desert. I've only got a few more slides, but post-fire in the desert environment, as many of us know, it's a highly variable environment. I mean, conditions change drastically within a year. And we have this bimodal precipitation pattern where we have a wet winter, dry, and then a wet summer, dry. And then we have a lot of change between years. Years can vary so much. That's what's challenging. So you have a burned site. You're either going to have some summer annuals or winter annuals are going to come depending on the rainfall. It's really dependent on the rainfall. And what's tricky about the desert is, do you do seeding or is there a seed bank for natural regeneration? That's a tough one. But I would say the important thing is to monitor. Red brome, can make a fire and come back with a vengeance. And some new invaders that you haven't seen before can find a new home in a burned area if they've got plenty of sunlight and very few competitors in a burned area. So we've got a lot of work to do. This is a wildfire hazard potential map for the United States from that website I showed earlier. Got a lot of work to do. This is a NC Web active fire incidents across the United States. Just a ton of stuff that's gone on. These are all, not all these are active, but they're recent and active fire events. So fire activity is significant and ongoing. So just 2 more slides. Opportunities. So what I see is just a real importance for citizen science and volunteers to help with prevention and detection and reporting and mapping. We've already seen that with the desert defenders. We need to dig in and protect special places. So Aravipa Canyon is a really special place. Tumamoc Hill in Tucson is a really special place. We need to dig in and protect those. And then just a thought is that a fire recovery guide for Arizona is something that I'm interested in partnering with others on. And then applying some of these wildfire concepts to invasive plant grant projects, like we learned today, like getting into that perimeter and working towards the core. We're going to need commitment and dedication and consistent funding to build some of these local programs and then develop a restoration economy where there's jobs and opportunities for people to work restoring some of these landscapes. And this is a photo of volunteers, and you get a group of volunteers together and they can do a lot of good on the landscape. So just for a little bit more information, you can go to our website, wildfirerisk.org is that USDA Forest Service where you can type in a community and take a look at the fire risk there. We have our own Arizona Wildfire Risk Assessment Portal. If you're interested, and you can type in an address there and see what's going on around you. And then our Twitter, AZ State Forestry on Twitter is updated daily. We really post a lot about things going on around the state. And when a fire breaks out, you can find out about it there. INCIWeb, that's where a lot of fire information is housed for across the country. You can look at different incidents across the state. And lastly, stay safe and healthy and be fire-wise. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Willie. All right, here we go. I have two questions for you, and one I partially answered, but it also, I wanted to see if you had any comments for that one as well. So the first one we had was, I have a group of teen naturalists working at a site in Marana on the Santa Cruz at Marana Heritage Park. We're doing a bunch of different things there. Monitoring tamarisk is one of them. How can we get involved to help with restoration and removal work? Yeah, I'll open it up to you if you have any recommendations.
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that Tucson Audubon Society is doing a project in that area, and they got some funding from us to do some work in the Marana area on the Santa Cruz River. So that might be one organization that you reach out to. But you're looking to get the teens more involved in invasive plant, learning about invasive plants.
I think that's kind of what Kathy's, yep, that's what Kathy's asking for.
Yeah, and if you want to, I have a contact over there with the Tucson Audubon Society because they're doing some work in that area, and they might be able to talk to you. And they've got a crew now. They call it a strike team. A crew of young folks that are going to do some invasive plant work. And yeah, because I would love for teens to get exposure to the opportunity to work in natural resources. Like you work outside, you're working with landscapes, you're working with wildlife, you're working with other people. Yeah, we need more stewards of the landscape and people that are passionate about the outdoors and nature to get these kinds of jobs.
Yeah, I definitely agree. They're also doing phenology work and monitoring water quality and more. So I think that would be a good contact. Audubon does a lot of that kind of stuff too. And then she also wants us to be able to see that the data they're collecting can be used, for good stuff. So that's always something that's very important for our volunteers as well. So thank you so much, Kathy, for that. And I hope that that's been helpful. So Willie, if you have that contact, if you could share that with me and I can share it with Kathy, perhaps. I know Kathy personally, so I don't know if that could work for you.
Yeah, let me put that in the.
In the chat, yeah. And then we had one more question, and I like the question a lot because I think it really touches on educational efforts as well. And we have one more question that popped in. So the next one is, we spend money on removing invasives that are sold in nurseries, for example, oleander and fountain grass, and both are used in landscapes. How can we change that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I know for what I've learned is that, hopbush is a great alternative to oleander. And I have some in my yard and my neighbor's yard too. I planted it in her yard too. But let's see. Yeah, the fountain grass, my understanding is that the fountain grass that's being sold now is sterile, that the seeds won't, are not viable. That is a challenging one to work with the nursery industry. One thing that happened in Scottsdale, and it was one of our grant projects, they had this plant exchange program, and that was so cool. It was, if you had fountain grass in your yard, the kind that that spreads into the desert, you could come to this event and get a voucher and get a native plant and go replace that fountain grass with the native plant. And like, that was terrific. That was a project through the McDowell Sonoran Conservancy, through one of our invasive plant grants. That was,
I recall that project. And I think that was a really cool project because it kind of highlighted that it's kind of an educational role. And that's why I really liked your question, Jan, because I think it's just a conversation that has to be had from the consumer to the nurseries, but then also just within your own HOAs and within your own communities, letting folks know that you could just take that out of the ground and there's a whole host of native plants and native species that are just as beautiful and that, you know, serve a much better purpose. So I think that maybe slowly we can change it that way, just by having those conversations with our HOAs as well. I think that that's important as well. And now we'll go ahead and move on to the next question from Sierra. Do you know of any projects targeting invasive insects?
Interesting. We do have, like there are bark beetles, which are native to our ponderosa pine forest. We're, you know, we have projects that bark beetles can really damage our ponderosa pine trees, especially when they're drought stressed. So we try to not target the insects, but target the trees that they, you know, take up shop in and remove those trees. But in terms of insects, not so much. Yeah, we have some forest health programs that deal with insects that impact our, you know, woodlands and our forests. And there is a, what is it, a Mediterranean pine engraver, MPE, which I don't think is native, is starting to impact some of our pine trees here in the Phoenix metro area. And so we are actually gathering data on the Mediterranean pine engraver because we're seeing some browning of our urban pine trees, like in parks and things like that. So that's a project that is kind of answers your question. And yeah, it is an invasive insect that, I'm sorry, I can't recall if it's native or not. It might be something that's non-native that's somehow arrived here and it's starting to impact our trees.
All right, next question. I live in New River and was wondering what has been helpful with dealing with stink net that isn't chemical. The communities are on wells and we don't want to contaminate the groundwater.
Yeah, let's see. With stink net, yeah, there are certainly non-chemical, non-herbicide methods, but it's going to take some labor. You know, you can, you know, dig them out. And then, again, it depends on how much land we're talking about, right? If you're on a little, you know, quarter acre, you might be able to handle, you know, your lot with digging, you know, hoeing the plants out or digging them. Mowing is kind of tough on stink net. It might just come back and set seed. So yeah, the manual control it is the way to go. And if you can get those plants before they flower, that's really what's crucial with stink net. If you can kill the plant before it flowers and sets seed, you've done a big help. Yeah, you know, weed whacking them is one way to suppress them. You know, you just got to watch out though. They're pretty pungent smelling, and some people have had like respiratory, like trouble breathing or, you know, wheezing when they're around that plant when it's really green and active.
Yeah. So
yeah, certainly understand the chemical concern, and if you have shallow groundwater, you might want to go a different route. Yeah, I see the comment. I know they stink. Yeah. That plant is from South Africa, and the cattle don't eat it there, and they said it just stinks. That's all it does. It doesn't feed their cattle, and it sucks for them, unfortunately.
I don't even think goats eat it. I don't think goats even like it either, that's telling enough. All right, so moving on to the next question. Do we have any purple loosestrife in Arizona? I heard there may be some popping up in South AC.
Huh. I have not heard anything on that. Yeah, that's a really common, you hear about that, in other portions of the country, but that is not on my radar screen. I have not heard, nope.
All right.
But if it is, it should be early detection, rapid response.
All right, and next question. How do some of these invasives make it to Arizona? That's a good question.
That's a great question. Yeah, boy, you name it, it's happened. Some of them were introduced intentionally, like salt cedar was introduced intentionally, I think in the 30s for stabilization of some of our, channels and drainages and river areas, and it's just taken off. And I think fountain grass may have been an ornamental grass that looks pretty. And someone did mention that there's Muhlenbergia, like deer grasses, that are a great alternative to fountain grass. But yeah, ornamentals that have been brought in, like vinca. Vinca is found at a lot of like home sites along, in rural, remote canyons, and people brought vinca to grow some vinca that maybe they had back home, and it's just taken off into our wildlands. So yeah, it's just a number of different ways: contaminated seed or contaminated hay. And then they're spread through equipment too. And our wildland fire fighting efforts could spread weeds as well. You have fire engines that are parked in a maybe a patch of an invasive plant, and they get called to another fire in another area, and they might have some of those seeds, or a branch with some seeds on there, and take those to another area. Just like the same with hiking, horseback riding. Yeah, a lot of our activities can spread plants as we move all around the place.
Yep. All right, now question is, where is the absolute best place to post invasive species? I map invasives, or I naturalist? What do you think?
Wow, I am not the guy to answer that. I know I've been kind of watching some of these mappings, and I think I have iNaturalist on my personal iPhone, and haven't used it too much. Oh, no, I have IMAP, actually. IMAP invasives on my phone. And so those are two good ones.
Definitely.
Yeah, sorry, no preference, no thought one way or the other. But thank you for posting. Yeah, if you're putting that information up, it's going to get used, trust me.
Yes, no matter where you put it. All right, and I think this is our last question from Kim Franklin. Most of this work requires money, at a minimum, to pay people to lead, oversee the work, whether it's education, EDRR, mapping, or on-the-ground invasive species removal. How can we garner continued support from the AZ state legislature for these types of restoration efforts? Or should we be looking for these types of support, other sources of support? On a related note, can you speak to the potential of legislation at the federal level, e.g. the Great Outdoors Act, which just passed, or the Corps Act, to support these efforts? Thank you so much, Kim, for that question.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. So I'm not really engaged on the federal level legislation, but I have heard that there is an interest from our senators, our two senators, on invasive plant management as it relates to our waterways, salt cedar impacting our water supply and our river systems. So there is some movement there. There's some talk there that could happen in the next year. And there's also a big push now. There's some EPA money through, I can't remember the name of the program, but EPA money is coming to the lower Gila River area for restoration and removal of salt cedar. And that was a site that was recently selected by the EPA. So there's going to be some federal money coming to Arizona one way or another, the lower Gila, and then maybe through a larger package at the federal level. The state legislature, the funding that was provided to DFFM, has been a huge help and we're going to continue to find and fund good grant projects. But there's a huge need out there beyond what we're doing. We're seeing a lot of applications the last 2 years. So we aren't in a position, being a state agency, to do any kind of lobbying or anything like that by any means. But certainly we're going to do a really good job with the state money that we've been provided, and we provide an annual report to the governor's office on this fund and how the funds are being spent and how much acres are being treated. And so we have a good approach in that way of showcasing and showing off the good work that is being done around the state with these dollars. And certainly there's potential for this fund to be added to. That's what happened with our state hazardous fuels vegetation fund. It started off $1 million a year, and due to the high need for protecting communities, it was increased, I think twice. So that may be able to happen in the future. The budgets are going to be tight, unfortunately, in the near future. But yeah, I think just doing a good job with these dollars is what we're really focused on, and showcasing and promoting integrated weed management and restoration, and working in areas where we can really make an impact, and where we can check those 4 boxes, as I showed in the statute, in terms of reducing fire and flooding, replacing non-natives with natives, enhancing wildlife habitat, and conserving water, because that's another thing that's critical here. So we'll see. And yeah, it does require money, Kim, and it requires maintenance and sustained effort. And I hope that, yeah, we can keep this thing going. There's a lot of need out there. Yeah, there's all kinds of grant opportunities too. I know we're not the only game in town.
Well, I think that's it. I'm just going to give folks just a couple of seconds while I kind of wrap up, if you have any questions. But thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Willie. This was a great presentation. And this will be available on CAZCA's YouTube to view probably tomorrow. And yeah, please share. And thank you so much, Willie, for your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us and for your great questions. And yeah, I think that's it. We can wrap up. All right, everybody, have a great night. I'm not seeing any more questions pop up. So, yep, thank you, everybody. Yeah, thanks. Thank you for joining us. And hope everybody has a good night.
Yeah, thanks, everyone, for listening and participating. And you guys take care.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Bye, Willie.
Bye.